We'll try it. Are we tracking now? Okay. Well, it's good if you guys should. Kind of ability to focus, sometimes too much so, right? The woman, I used to have a piece in here on the woman's capability to do multitasking, right? The man is kind of wired in series, and the woman is wired in parallel, right, for those electrical engineers. And the woman is sort of the master of the multitasking. She can do a dozen things at once and do them well. The guy is supposed to be focused, right? And he does, sometimes too much, right? It says, the husband must honor these differences rather than belittling them, which is very common in marriage. One of the ways this often plays out in marriage is that husbands and wives look upon these differences with disdain. Somehow they think that this is bad, that the man and the woman are different, right? It's not bad. It's the way God created it. It says, they just don't understand one another. In one sense, the husband tries to make the woman more masculine, like he is, and or the woman tries to make the husband more feminine. This is kind of a thing in human nature, is that we often tend to try to make the other like us, as though we were some model to be made after, right? And that's the marriage is the last place for that to happen, because there are these two roles we've talked about here for several weeks now that must be honored in the way God intended them when he created them, right? It says, why does he, Peter, tell husbands to be more considerate about the wives and not vice versa? Why does he call her the weaker vessel? right? He says, well, if you think of the husband's vessel as being like a stack of bricks and the wife's like a delicate vase, if God calls the brick and the vase to dance, which vessel is more likely to get hurt? Right? This is very true. But as we've talked several times before, the woman has a different perspective on things. We'll talk about here as well this morning. And that different perspective needs to be respected and honored as well. Right? So many times marriage is like this. The brick is constantly hurting the vase. They have a different structure, and therefore the brick needs to take great care in handling the vase. Just think if you were wearing a pair of brick gloves and you're trying to handle this delicate vase, you need to be very, very careful with it, right? That's not an offense to the woman. She's made this way, right? She's made that way because she becomes more sensitive to certain things that the guy is not sensitive to, right? In fact, we were just talking yesterday. It makes me think, we were just talking yesterday. Sister Annabelle and Sister Betty brought the kids out this weekend. We were doing some guy stuff out there in the yard and actually shooting the guns. And I was telling her that it's a little piece of trivia that quite often the woman is a much better shot than the man is when it comes to accuracy. Because when it comes down to making that shot as accurate as possible, it all comes down to trigger control. How well can you control that trigger, right, and make sure it goes off exactly when you want it to? Turns out the woman has a much more sensitive touch in her finger than the man does. And she can control that trigger better than a guy does a lot of times, depending on the training they've gotten, right? So, okay. It says, God has given males and females different vessels, and it affects how we interact with other people and our environment. For many marriages, these differences are a source of constant conflict. We need to honor the difference, the delicateness and the strength of the other vessel. Some things that would bother you emotionally will probably, or would not bother you emotionally, would probably bother someone else. Males and females are different. When God created us, these differences were intentional attributes and must be honored. Okay, so, Brother Ken, can you give me some concrete examples of how this is applied in the real world? Well, I'm glad you asked. Here's an example. These two folks might view this activity a little differently. You know, the guy might go, well, the baby's laughing. He's having a great time. What's wrong, right? And the woman's about to lose her mind, right? Why? Well, they're wired a bit differently, and they see these activities differently, right? It frankly doesn't mean necessarily one is right and the other is wrong. But we have to recognize that there are different perspectives, right? And should it change the way we behave? Let's think about it. And how about the simple request, honey, can you watch the kids today? Sure. Okay. She might have a little different perspective on this one too, right? And the guys like to think, you know, guys are guys, right? We got a big guy and a little guy, and they're supposed to kind of like the same stuff, right? And they might. Doesn't make it right, right? I mean, back in my day when our kiddies were about that big, I started taking them with me on my motorcycle sometimes, right? Long before they could reach the handlebars, or they could reach the pedals, or they could wear a helmet. So I set them in front of me on the tank of the motorcycle, and they would hold onto my arms, and I just kind of put around the neighborhood. So I didn't go out on the interstate and take them 100 miles an hour down the road, right? But we just kind of rode around. They loved it. The wife was not all that impressed with that particular activity, right? Going, can we do maybe tricycles first? You know, bicycles maybe. Motorcycle, I don't know, right? So, and for the teenage guys in the room, you may have an idea about this. In fact, those two guys may have agreed before this activity started. But teenage guys have a tendency to be, shall we say, a little reckless sometimes. And I would say that recklessness is often a product of just a lack of forward thinking and think this thing through. Now, Grandma knew exactly what was going to happen. I'm not sure exactly what she thinks she's going to accomplish here, right? But she could see the future on this one, right? So little brother's probably about to get a cracked skull, right? And we'll talk about it later is kind of the attitude, right? But for the younger guys, the point I'm trying to get across here is that these are training opportunities for you, right? When mom or grandma or perhaps even older sister object to something like this, it might be worth your while to listen a little bit, at least think about it, give it a second thought, right? Because bad things could be on the horizon, right? So, and again, it doesn't have to be as extreme as this. It can be simple stuff about should I go this way or that way, right? And the point is that there is more than one perspective, and they could both be right, right? So, respect versus honor. It should be noted that the word respect is not strong enough. That's why they use the word honor in the Bible, right? It says husbands must not only respect their wives, but honor them. So what are some training opportunities that we can think of for the guys? I'm talking about the young unmarried guys that are coming up, right? Some of the old guys might need to be retrained. I mean, who knows? But particularly for the young guys who are coming up, what are some things we may be able to do to sort of start training? And oh, by the way, for the ladies, you're looking for guys who are willing to be trained or who are voluntarily in a training program, shall we say, right? They're willing to be trained. But one is to praise them and thank them for what they do. You know, there's an old country, I'll date myself a little bit here. There's an old country song. It's called, It's Those Little Things That Make Me Love You So. Everybody ever heard that? Old Charlie Pride song from 1,000 years ago, right? But one of the phrases in there is, it goes, the way you make my coffee in the morning, right? My wife makes my coffee for me every single day, and she brings it in. I'm sitting in the office, and I try to make sure I thank her for it when she gives it to me. It's every day, happens every day of the week, right? But I like to say thank you. All those little things that she does that makes the house, the home, right? Buying the groceries, cooking the meals, keeping house if necessary, whatever. You know, all those little things that she does as that help that is meat for you. Make sure you recognize it's being done, first of all. You appreciate it, second of all. Praise them and thank them for what they do. Got to show the appreciation daily for the spouses and their differences. They might choose to do something a little differently than you do, but guess what? They're doing it and you're not, right? Might want to think about that. Here's another one. Take time to enjoy the activities that they enjoy, right? So you'll oftentimes find the lady will try to spend time with the guy doing the things he likes to do. In this case, they're bicycling, right? They might play a sport or tennis or, you know, go fishing. My wife likes to go fishing with me. Not that she likes to fish, but she likes to be on the boat and go out and see the wildlife and, you know, spend time out in the sunshine and stuff like that. But that's kind of my thing, right? But she goes with me. Guys, you need to do things with her. Things like shopping, going to see mom, right? There can be lots of things that the lady wants to do, likes to do, has a hobby to do, perhaps. You need to be as involved with those as she is with yours, right? That may sound like common sense, but as the old saying goes, you know, common sense is the world's least common commodity, right? And a lot of people just don't do it, right? So we kind of combine it sometimes. My wife likes to go shopping with me at Bass Pro Shop. But we can, you know, I'll be looking at the guns and the archery and the ammo and, you know, the fishing gear and all the outdoor stuff, right? Well, it turns out Bass Pro Shop has got a whole women's apparel line of outdoor stuff, right? They got cooking stuff for cooking wild game and fish and all that stuff. So she does all that stuff with me. I don't mind going to the grocery store with her because she's making the menus all the time, and she'll frequently come to me. So what do you crave? What would you like to have for, you know, this meal? I'm going, I don't know, but you know what? I'll go to the grocery store with you, and if I see something that tickles my fancy, I'll point, you know. You can decide if you're going to pick that up and put it in the menu for the week, right? So it's this kind of a sharing thing. Because we've heard for decades now, I guess, this whole philosophy of marriage being 50-50, We're going to divide it all. You do that stuff, I'll do this. This is guy stuff, this is girl stuff. And never the twain shall meet, okay? Never was that way. Marriage never was 50-50. It was always 60-60, right? Both sides have to be willing to do more than 50%. Because there will be times where you'll be called upon to do that, and there'll be times when she'll be called upon to do that, right? And it's going to have to balance out over time. But the point is, that there has to be an attitude where you're willing to go above and beyond. Because frankly, I'll tell you, that is really what holds the marriage together. Because if it really was 50-50, where I could define this stuff, and you're going to do that, and nothing else, and I'm going to define this stuff and do that, I could hire somebody to do that. I can write a contract for somebody to come in and do that stuff, right? I don't need a wife for that. I need a help that is meet for me. And that's a 60% proposition, okay? So one more, respect versus honor. Now, we talk about listening to them. I know the ladies have a reputation for perhaps sometimes getting stuck in transmit, if you know what I mean. I mean, there is this physical attribute that the woman has. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but she actually has the ability to speak on the inhale and the exhale. Right? I mean, she can talk for an hour straight and never take a breath. Have you seen that? Right? Well, there's a reason for that, right? She's got something that needs to be said in her mind, and you need to be willing to listen, okay? Listening is probably the greatest form of respect, right? And when you listen and do something about it, that may be the greatest form of honor, right? You're honoring her views, the way she sees. Are you actually willing to take that stuff aboard? Now, you may have to sift through an hour's worth of stuff, okay? But you got to figure out the important part in there, right? And apply it to some situation that she's talking about and do something about it, okay? That shows that you're actually interested enough in what she has to say to apply it somewhere, to do something about it, right? So, and then there's this other piece we hear talked about a lot. But I think it's important. Everybody heard this quote? I know you believe you understand what you thought I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you think you heard is not what I thought I meant. Have I ever heard that? I think it's pretty accurate, frankly, because in any form of communication, if I'm communicating from one to the other, there are at least 4 elements of it. There's what I wanted to say. There's what actually came out of my mouth, right? That's what she thinks she heard, and then what she thinks I meant by what she thinks she heard. Is that making sense? Let me give you an example. I'll say, it's very warm in this building, air conditioning's out, right? But I happen to look outside and notice there's a breeze blowing, and it's probably much, much cooler outside than it is here, so I'm going to go out. I'm going to invite Sister Rebecca to go out as well, because I've observed it might be cooler out there. So I turn to her and I say, Sister Rebecca, would you like to go out with me? What do you think she just heard? Well, she's reaching for her ball bat about now, okay? And oh, by the way, my wife is sitting back there. She's already got hers out, right? Right? So it's not necessarily that what you said was wrong in your mind, but the words you chose to transmit it with might be interpreted differently from the other person, right? We like the example, we had the Ukrainian family living with us for a while, and Sister Alina, I thought, had an excellent command of the English language. She was great, right? You remember her little daughter, Amelia, 9 years old, about this tall, approximately that big around, right? So in the wintertime, she was cold in her room, and Sister Alina came to us and asked if we could make that bedroom warmer, right? Because Amelia was cold. And she says she's cold because she has no grease on her. And I'm going, well, I wasn't intending to cook her, but we can probably figure out some way to make the room warmer. And I find this, frankly, we've talked about this often, my wife and I. Even in this assembly, I think at the last count we represented something like 28 different countries, right? And many folks, for many folks, English is not their first language, right? And so it's not that what is said is wrong. It's just that the word that they happen to choose to express a thought is different from the one I might choose, particularly a country boy, right, who uses words a lot of people never heard of before, right? But it just comes across to me a little differently. She wanted to say she has no fat on her for insulation, but she says she has no grease on her. I'm going, okay, I'll see if I can find some grease as well, right? So it's little things, but in the communication business, it's very important, and it is much, much more important in a marriage. Because even though you may come from exactly the same backgrounds, and you're trying to communicate, you'll find that happens from time to time. What you say is not interpreted the way you thought it was going to be interpreted, you know? And you wind up wearing a frying pan for a week or two, right? It's not the place you want to be. You don't want to get to this kind of a place either, right? Where you make the assumption that what you thought, A, is correct, B, was transmitted and understood correctly. So when you're trying to communicate, you need to at least consider that all four of those other elements are in play simultaneously. And so if something isn't actually coming across the way you think, or the reaction is not quite what you expected, you know, I'm trying to be nice to Sister Rebecca and she knocks my block off, right? You might want to step back and think, did I say something wrong? Could I have said it differently, right? Because there is also this realm where there are two different perspectives and they are both correct, okay? So it is incumbent upon the communicator to make sure that his thought is actually transmitted accurately, right? And to identify if there is another perspective that is actually correct, right? So you can't hold it against the other person for pointing out something that is correct from a different perspective. You need to kind of work it out. Make sure the communication was accomplished, right? So down to the last verse here, he says, you're supposed to give honor to the wife, et cetera, that your prayers be not hindered. And finally, be all of one mind, having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful and courteous, not rendering evil for evil, or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that you are thereunto called, that ye should inherit a blessing. So if you're doing this correctly, according to Peter, this couple has unhindered, powerful prayer. And you're kind of supposed to be in tune with one another in order to make that happen, right? That requires accurate communication, right? So it says the your in the hinder your prayers is actually plural. They both pray every day. And when they're walking in unity with one another, God is answering their prayers. They pray for souls to be saved and people to be healed, finances to come in to help people. And this godly couple is seeing answers to their prayers. This should be what we see in the life of a godly couple all the time. So we're talking here often about, reading the Bible, praying every day, so you can stay close to God, okay? The other person needs to do that as well. We're going to talk about how that actually comes together here in a little bit. But it is very important that not only are you on that path, but she's on the same path you are, guys. And you have to talk about that sometimes to make sure that's happening. So it says, for this reason, Peter warns that strife in a relationship actually hinders the prayers of a couple, and it makes their prayers ineffective. We see this principle generally taught throughout Scripture. We saw it from David. He says, if I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me, right? You got to be kind of squared away. You got to be cleaned up. So it's Brother Branham talking. He says, we take, for instance, the marriage for union. We find out that the marriage, we find the courtship and the agreements, and then the marriage. That should settle it for all the time. Now, that's the same thing it is with Christ and the church, see? A courtship, God is calling to our hearts. We surrender, the marriage ceremony, and the bride takes the bridegroom's name. See? There it is. That makes it bride. Now, always the bride takes the bridegroom's name. So we talked about last week, I wanted to kind of, for particularly the young people who are coming up considering marriage in the future, those who are not married yet, right? To think about these things we're talking about in the context of courtship, right? What does it mean in the context of courtship leading to marriage and then the marital relationship, right? So last week we kind of defined the courtship thing, and it's called the wooing of one person to another. Well, what is wooing? Well, we talked about that too. It's to seek the affection with the intent to romance. You're trying to figure out, both of you, trying to figure out if that person is the right lifetime partner, right? And what the potential is there. I'll talk about it here in a second, but what you don't want to do is expect that that person comes prepackaged as perfection like you bought them at Walmart or something, right? Doesn't happen. You're both growing. And so you need to learn how to grow together, right? So I don't know how many people recognize this. I used this a long time ago, but our pastor in Tampa was very fond of this picture. We used to tease him about his 3 circles. But remember, Brother Branham talks about the 5 senses that we contact our environment with. See, taste, touch, hear, smell, and smell, right? And then we have these 5 senses we contact the spirit realm with: reason, affection, imagination, conscience, and memory. And then deep down in the soul, there's only 2, faith and doubt, right? That's what makes up a human being, right, is these 3 realms. So the point I'd like to make here this morning is that this person is supposed to be pursuing a relationship with God, if we're talking about a Christian, right? Brother Branham calls it the thinking man's filter, right? So if you're considering something to do, go this way or that way, and you don't know the answer, you try to run it through the filter, and it helps you answer that question, right? There's no more important question in the world than choosing the lifelong partner, okay? So you want to make sure that you're running everything through that filter. So you've heard it said many times that you shouldn't be considering someone who is not a Christian. And you go, well, that's pretty prejudiced, you know. Not really, because if this really is you, and you really are trying to do this, the point is that you're pursuing a set of standards, a goal, a set of standards of behavior that's greater than you are. You didn't make it up, right? You're trying to conform to a greater standard that we know is better than what we can come up with, right? And so we're trying to make sure that everything that we do here goes through this filter and comes out good on the other side. For that reason, you want your lifelong partner to have a similar mindset. You want them to be using the same filter. Because if you come to different conclusions on those things that you want to do, or that you think are right or wrong, whatever set of values that you want to apply to your life, if you come to different conclusions about what those are, that's the best source of conflict probably there is, right? And you're trying to avoid conflict in this relationship to the extent you can, right? So, girls and guys both, you're looking for a potential partner that is using the same filter that you are, right? Have the same sorts of spiritual growth, intentions, goals, even processes and procedures sometimes that you have. And that's why we frequently talk about looking within the same church organization or church realm, if you will. And that's probably the easiest place to look. It doesn't say it's exclusive. There may be other people out there who are using the same filter. But then as you go through this courtship process and you're beginning to learn more about each other and how you think and what things are important to you in life, the point is, now you're not just reading the same Bible, you're reading the same Bible and coming to the same conclusions by having interpreted it in the same way, right? Using the same kind of guidance. You're listening to that same inner voice and coming to the same conclusions, right? And that can be very difficult sometimes, right? So that again requires effective communication. You have to sit down and talk about those things. And not the least of which, that the husband is going to be held accountable by God to answer for the decisions that are made on this side, right? It's a big, it's a big responsibility. If the husband and wife disagree on something, but they talk it out, they go through this filtering process, the husband makes a decision one way or the other, right? And it's wrong. But the wife submitted to the husband's authority in going with that decision. The Lord will look at her as having done everything right, right? Because she obeyed her head, right? It's a question of headship. Now the guy, depending on what's happened over here, He's the one who's ultimately accountable. Good, bad, or indifferent, right? He's the one that has to answer for those things. So you go into this thing as a team sport, but one guy is held accountable. It's like, I'm a Navy guy, right? So if I'm the commanding officer of a ship and the ship runs aground, I may not have even been on the bridge, but I was supposed to train my crew to keep water under the keel and not dirt, right? And so when the ship winds up aground, the first one to lose his job is me, because I was the one who was accountable for all 500 souls on that ship. I was accountable for all of the training that was supposed to be given to make sure that they did not wind up with dirt under the keel, right? I'm the first one to be held accountable. So same is true for the husbands, right? You're the ones accountable. So if you do this, and you get to this point where you're both using the same filter, and what's coming out the other end is the same product, that's when the two become one, right? So the point I'm making here is that when you begin this relationship, you're still both in a growing we'll be growing in the Lord till the day they put us in a box, every one of us, right? And so we'll all be learning as we go. But the point is, like I say, neither side comes prepackaged with a good housekeeping seal of perfection on them, right? The Lord is working on both sides. But if you're sincerely looking at that other standard, the one, not the one that you made up, but his standard that he's told us we're supposed to be living by, if both sides are sincerely doing this, he then makes you one, right? It's not like the Lord made that single person that is the perfect one for you, and it's 1 in 700 billion people on the planet, and you're supposed to go sort through all those 7 billion people and find it. It's not actually the way it works, right? But you're looking for someone who's willing to do this, and let him make you one. Let him make her the meat, the help that is meat for you, right? And let him make you, guys, the appropriate head of household that's going to take care of her appropriately, right? So, with all of that said, I wanted to get down to this fundamental question, I suppose, that runs around, I think, in a lot of young people's minds, particularly those who are not married yet and looking to be married sometime in the future. So tell me about this courtship thing. How does that actually work? What do we actually do to do the courtship thing, right? So first, I thought we'd look at how does the world do it? Well, in some cases, the guy might ask the dad for permission to date the girl. That's becoming increasingly uncommon today, right? In most cases, it's the guy asks the girl, she agrees to go out, right? Dad may not even have an inkling that anything is happening, but they go out, and if it works out, that's great. If it doesn't, repeat. Okay, lather, rinse, repeat, right? On and on and on. And that's not the way we're supposed to be doing it as Christians, right? So this is the way we should be doing it. The guy recognizes that she has a spiritual head, right? It should be her father. If the father's not in the picture, there should be a pastor. If there are neither of those, guys, I'm going to submit you're probably looking in the wrong place, right? I could get in trouble for that statement, but I think that's kind of true. There should be a spiritual head, and she should be recognizing a spiritual head. Why? Because you would like to observe and see how she responds to her spiritual head, because that's the same way she's going to respond to you when you become her spiritual head, right? So I'm going to cop out here right quick. You can say, "Oh, you're just kind of avoiding the question," but no, I'm not. I'm going to try to emphasize that this thing is about the spiritual head. So if you want to define courtship, guys, you're interested in a particular young lady, or young ladies even, courtship is defined however her spiritual head defines it, right? So if her father says, yeah, you can court my daughter, you can go here and not there, right? You first want to be observing if she accepts that leadership, right? If she's going to submit to that, and you guys need to submit to that as well, right? Because the way she handles spiritual leadership is the same way she's going to handle your spiritual leadership, all right? So you're looking for someone who is willing to recognize the fact that there is a spiritual head, and they treat that person accordingly, right? So you ask your dad. The dad talks to her, right? And she goes, yeah, I might kind of like to get to know this guy. Or forget it. Not in 1,000 years. Okay? One or the other. Dad brings the message back, right? And if it happens to be positive, right? Dad consents. Now he is going to define the sorts of activities that are appropriate. That's the way it should be done, right? And it should be public activities in the beginning. Like I say, the idea is you're trying to know more about that person, try to learn more about who they are, where they came from, what their aspirations are, what their goals are, what they like and don't like, et cetera, et cetera. Remember we talked last week about how the husband is supposed to know the wife, right? Supposed to know everything she likes and doesn't like, right? How she intends to run a household in the future, perhaps, stuff like that. After some period of time, the spiritual head may authorize what I'll call private discussions. But they're not private discussions, right? Usually in the old days, it was called a parlor visit, right? He would invite the young man over, and the young man and the young lady would sit in the parlor and talk, and they could have their own private discussions, but Dad's still in the vicinity, right? So, and it's at that time probably when you're talking about those more detailed sorts of things about how you think the household should be run and what, how we should be raising kids and et cetera, things like that, right? So if that goes well, then the guy's going to come back to the dad and ask for her hand. We call it asking her hand. Ask him to marry her, right? Because at this point, the dad is also making his own evaluation, right? He is her spiritual head. He's accountable for her as a spiritual head until he gives her to you, right? So he wants to make sure that you are a worthy spouse for his daughter, right? And that you are really going to take care of her the way he would have her taken care of. So it's his approval as well as hers, right? And Dad's gonna talk it over with her again, and she might say, I don't think it's going real good, Dad. I'm not sure this is the right guy. So Dad has the opportunity at that point to, cut it off. Or she could say, yeah, is tomorrow too soon? One of those, right? So that kind of dialogue goes on with the spiritual head. Once he approves all of that stuff, there's this wedding ceremony, which frankly is something that's invented by man, right? In the eyes of God, I think when the two commit to one another, right, they're married. They don't necessarily have to have this show that we put on for a wedding ceremony, right? We like to do it, right? But and the law likes to have some kind of an official something so they can recognize you as a couple, right? But there's the wedding ceremony, and then the bride takes his name, and you find all too often today these couples get married and the bride does not take the husband's name, right? Any idea why that would be? Because she's already looking at an escape route, right? If it doesn't work out, we'll just do this divorce thing and we'll go on and we'll try again. Lather, rinse, repeat, right? If she's really going to commit, she needs to commit to take his name. This is a type also of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Once we commit to him, we take on his name. We are Christians, right? We take on his name. And so we need to see the wife take on the husband's name because she is now part of him. She is that help that is meet for him. She's the other half that the Lord is going to make into a complete whole, right? And as the wedding vows say, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder, right? It's a permanent decision. And I've often thought, it seems curious to me that young people are trying to make the most important decision they will ever make on the face of the earth during their time on the earth. There is no more important decision than this other than choosing to follow Jesus Christ to begin with, right? The single most important decision you will ever make, and you're trying to make it at a time when you have the least amount of experience, the least amount of knowledge and know-how. And I consider that to be very, very dangerous. I also see that as a cultural thing, right? Because we can see it really wasn't that way. In fact, I used to tell my kids, Isaac was a full 40 years old before Abraham ever started even looking for a wife for him. And my kids go, Dad, wake up, will you? But I'm going, the point is, you need to have mom and dad involved in those kinds of things because they have been down the road, before you were. All this pressure to try to be married by a certain age, I think is a man-made thing straight from the devil, right? Because age is not what determines this thing, right? It is a state of mind. It is a level of commitment. It is a trust in the Lord Jesus Christ to bring it all together. It is a trust that you really are going to be a type of that relationship we have to Jesus Christ, both of you, as a team, right? And nobody can guarantee it's going to happen by a certain age, right? So I kind of poo-poo this notion that, if you're not married by such and such an age, you're wrong or something's wrong. Nada. You need to make sure you make the right choice, right? That's the most important thing, right? So that's what I have for this series. And as I mentioned to some of them here a little bit earlier, I found out about 30 minutes before the class today that we really are going to have Sunday school in our temporary facility. So I guess same time, different place, different channel. And my technical crew here has vowed to take all of this gear over there and figure out how to put it all together. So we'll expect to have Sunday school next week as well. Any questions on that? Let's close with prayer. Lord Jesus, once again, we do thank you that you've given us your word. We thank you that you've given us this stuff that we can rely upon as the absolute truth as to how we're supposed to be conducting ourselves in these last days. I pray that you would open our hearts and our eyes and shine a light on our path that we might know how we can represent you best in these last days. We'd ask once again that you'd open our hearts to the bread of life that's broken to us from the pulpit, that we would come away better equipped to serve you. For we ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.